Ken, thank you for joining me. Where does today's recording find you?
Well, quite literally in the basement. But mentally, this has been one of those weeks where almost everybody I've talked to has said something to spark thoughts of perspective and reminders to keep your perspective as wide as possible. And I like to talk about it as where you put your camera. Swing your camera a lot around to different points of view just to keep from getting stuck in one particular way of thinking. So, and being stuck in one particular way of thinking is also a nice way to say I'm in the basement.
Would you mind telling me a bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah, I wonder about it myself sometimes. So exploring it verbally is probably a good idea. And we landed on it because, well, I'll jump back to the beginning, but I won't take forever. Um, I have a degree in theater, studied acting, and spent most of my performing career as a voiceover artist. So doing commercials for radio and television, and then a lot of video games. Um, like the Halo series and Destiny, those big games. I did quite a bit of work on those, and as my daughter told me when she was young, I'm at my friend's house, and she wants to go back and kill you again. So so played a lot of diverse characters across that, and it wasn't until my wife and I started Message Glue, which is a communication consulting agency, I guess, and we basically help people communicate more effectively. She's done a lot of teaching in the past and a lot of coaching, and I've done a lot of writing, so we just put those things together to help people shape their thoughts and focus them and deliver them in whatever medium they need to. So it might be video, it might be on stage, it might be in meetings. We've had teams come to us and say one particular person, really bright, has trouble, you know, getting engaged in meetings. Can you help him? And we've done giant events. I think my largest audience is 15,000. So where I wrote and directed on stage talent. So, and in my mind, it's all the same. We're just helping people communicate more effectively. And media helps, microphones help, big screens help. Um, and so working with those kinds of production teams, we make those meetings, whatever, one-on-one or one on 15,000, more effective and meaningful for the people who are having them. And so it really changes a lot. I'm working on a meeting now that'll be a conference, 2,000 people maybe. Another one that'll be virtually 5,000 attending on their screens. I'm also doing some work with internal communications teams, just helping with little stories, articles or whatever for their intranet that employees need to understand and respond to. So in my mind, it's all the same. It's just humans communicating with other humans. And the deliverable doesn't matter as much. Well, the medium doesn't matter as much as the deliverable, which is effective communication.
On the bigger end, in terms of audience for your work, is there a common thing that you're doing either today or in the recent past, like, for example, writing a keynote speech?
Done a lot of keynote speech writing, yes. Um, and a big part of that is, one of the things we have coming up, I write the keynote speech for the leader, but then it's making sure that those elements and tendrils of that make their way into everyone else's presentation so that the audience sees all the connections and we help them along on the path to greater understanding. And and those are really based on what I think is fun about that is like a keynote speech in itself doesn't sound that exciting, but it's a keynote speech for Martha or Bill or whomever, and that person's unique personality is what drives the way it's delivered and how the content is shaped, and that's one of my favorite parts is helping them shape their thoughts, but also avoid some of the pitfalls of, shall we say, illogical or awkward storytelling. Because humans recognize it right away. Something's weird, or I just lose interest and check my phone. And so that's the big challenge is to make sure that that human connection that's made at the beginning lasts all the way through.
Is there a common type of work, or is there a place that, in your recent past, you do a large amount of work that shows up in conference presentations, for example? Or are you really spread across a lot of different communications media?
Well, in the very recent past, keynote speech, um, a proudly very brief 1 minute and 7 second explainer video for a very cool scholarship program. Um, these short communication articles, um, emails, even some Slack announcements. So um, I just don't. I had this conversation with somebody I worked with who like apologized for it not being the thing you actually do. And I said, the thing I actually do is help people communicate. So it doesn't matter to me
Right.
if it's a
Okay.
keynote or if it's I see it all the same because at its very, and I have it, if somebody wants to dive deeper into this, I have a video on my LinkedIn page about how we at Message Glue look at storytelling because it's really connecting humans together. How do we make sure we're connecting the human beings to each other in a meaningful way? And that kind of macro, like swing my camera way back to make sure that I have that's always in my mind so that I don't get stuck on the things that usually happen to people, especially in bigger companies where they have all these internal pressures and someone needs to say, yes, but from a human standpoint, let's look at it. Is there a way that we can make sure we maintain that while you're being compliant with whatever corporate pressure you have on you?
So, in the clients that you tend to work with, if your work has to go on somebody's budget, would you be more likely to show up in a communications team if they have one that's separate from a marketing team, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it depends on, and some marketing teams and communications teams are under the same organization. So um, we really the because it's collaborative and because everybody's input matters to how, especially when you're an external person and there's an internal team, all of that information is really important. So we embrace all of the collaborative part of it. So it doesn't really matter where we show up. I've had CEOs bring me in and tell me what they want and then go make sure everybody else follows it. I've had communications teams bring me in. I've had agencies bring us in as a subcontractor to be what we call the keeper of the story to make sure that it's going to align throughout an event or a rollout or a strategy or whatever it is. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Okay.
it's hard. I mean, because you have a marketing background, which you could help me. One of the hardest parts about this is about this particular niche that we've landed in is referrals are really the only way that we increase our business because once people have it, they see the value and want it more. But it's hard to quantify against the existing structure. Um, and I remember, on past things where people said, "No, we don't need that. We don't need anybody to develop content for the CEO. They just do their own thing." I think, well, then they're doing a disservice to their people because there's no transparency to what it is that they do. So
Yeah.
that's and those are the things you go, well, okay, then if you don't need us, you don't need us.
I was really curious about, you know, where does your work fit? And given what you were just saying, I think s- it's not as simple as straddling, a line between marketing and communications, but also I had wondered coming into this how much a client or even you might think about your work as not necessarily being marketing or communications or something else, but maybe something like leadership, because communications and storytelling is a big part of leadership.
It is, but I have clients who work in leadership, and it's really not what we do. Although there have been plenty of conversations where I had with leaders where I said, "Hearing what you just said, I do you are you sure the audience wants to hear that?" And breaking it apart for them, and from the standpoint of somebody who's listening to them and not inside their own head, and helping them think about it in a way that now it's communication. It's a thought. It's not communication yet, but it's on its way. Let's make sure that it's the right kind of communication. So, in that way, I guess I get a little bit involved in it. One of my favorite moments, I had a friend who connected me with a guy who had a corporate communication, very successful corporate communications company. And he said, "Tell me what you do." And I described kind of basically what I'm saying to you, to him. And he said, "Oh, well, you do the hard part." And I thought, okay, great. And what good is that to me? Because it's cocky to say it like, well, we do the hard part, other people can't do it, which is pointless and silly to bring up and hard to market. And not everybody wants the hard part. And I had a conversation with somebody who's just starting out in a small one person agency for now. She was curious about some of my thoughts about it. And I just said, you don't need a lot of clients or huge clients. You just need people who come to you and trust you. And so the challenge is not to market yourself like crazy. You have to find those people, find your people, and they'll refer you to their people, and that'll help you grow. And if you get to a certain size, it becomes a different marketing exercise. But we realized if we traditionally tried to market ourselves, that it wouldn't have worked because it turns into a conversation about, well, you do this, but you don't do that. And but you don't do full event production? No, we fit into a place between here and here. Well, why don't you just hire an event company then? Yeah, they don't have that. People usually don't. Yeah, but do we need it? I think you do, but some people think you don't, and it becomes that sort of, ineffective moment of stonewalling that feels like, okay, well, let us know, you know, how it goes, and if you need help in the future, we're around.
I might be wrong here, but as you're saying this, I'm thinking about the difficulty of outbound sales or, really push marketing, traditional advertising, digital advertising, whatever, when you either need to be able to differentiate yourself from similar products or services, or you really truly do have something new and different because in this probably in a way that I was not thinking about comes back around to issues of storytelling and communications generally. But, at times you need to leverage the audience member's existing mental model or their understanding of the world and meet them where they are so that then you can, I guess, earn the right perhaps to open their eyes to, well, you are a new or different thing. And so when you said referrals, then I was thinking, okay, that at that point, I suspect that, you know, people, birds of a feather flock together, sort of, And so if you have a client, doesn't matter what their role is, CEO or otherwise, who gets it, so to speak, then they probably have some people who also are likely to get it and may also have a similar need, regardless of whether you fit into certain categories or labels.
Yeah, and I don't know that I'd use the phrase "get it," because it's really a I know that in an effective moment with a client that I just make their lives easier, and I help them make what they're trying to do a little better or a lot better depending on what it is we're doing, and that I think that they're the ones who, "Oh, this took a load off of me, it's something that I don't normally do, and it was a lot easier," and my wife who, helps people be their very best in any communication scenario, same thing, they're more comfortable. They don't, it's they know how to work with their very human, nervousness or trepidation or whatever people go through when they're in a meeting with people or if they're on a stage. And if we can make their lives easier and make the communication better, then I think that's when we get referred on to somebody else because it's, I mean, it's really the same way you work with anybody, if you think about the people that you do business with. I go to that guy for my car repair because he's fair and he's good and he's fast, you know, and they're nice people when you see them, and all those things matter, and I kind of look at it that way, that we meet them where they are, we make incremental progress with the effectiveness of their communication. Sometimes it's not incremental, sometimes it's a big move, sometimes it's not, but it always I mean, we can always get better even if we're really, really good at it. We can always improve. So we know there's always room.
When you meet a new CEO, for example, or larger company, and you are going to be working with them on that, I think, 67-second explainer video or a conference presentation or whatever it is that you're working with them on. What do you look for in their style or their communication, their affect or their presentation or language, whatever else? And when you do look for those things, how does that impact what you might or might not accomplish with them?
Well, we go in knowing our fingerprints are all unique, and everybody's unique. We have lots of similarities. We share human psychology. There's a lot of similar things that we do that make us all the same, and yet each of us is individually different. And we love people. Like we're the kind of people if we go on a vacation or even on a job, we talk about the people we met, not, wasn't that a beautiful place to be? Um, and so I'm just always interested to know what perspective this person is coming from and what do they want to improve? Um, what lights them up? One guy, one of my favorite CEO relationships, he would just book 2.5 hours of my time. I'd turn on my phone recorder and he'd pace around the room and just spill everything. His frustrations, his desires, the needs, the wants, and that was a particular conference. What he needed from his people, what he needed from the attendees, everything just blah. And invariably by the end, we had a nice simpatico kind of working relationship. Invariably by the end of the about 2 hours, I would say, "It sounds like this is where we're headed, and if this works, it'd be great," and that it sounds like underlying it is this story that's causing tension, and at that point, he would either say, and both are great, "Yes, let's continue from here," or, no, because," and some new element comes in that I haven't heard yet. And then fills in the picture even more. It's like sometimes, if you ever have Chat GPT draw something for you, it's like waiting while it's just a blurry mess, and is it gonna come out and be what I want it to be? And in that, I kind of thrive in that blurry mess, because I know at the very basis of it, here's a human being who wants to accomplish something, And every great story is that's what it's about. And in that desire and need and movement toward what it is we desire or want or need to achieve are all the things that make great stories, challenges and comedy and drama and falling down and picking yourself up and there's always a climactic moment and there's always a denouement that, you know, fades off toward, the next episode or whatever. Um, because we're humans, that's what we do. So when I remember that, it helps me just keep my mouth shut and listen for all the elements of the story. Because putting them in the order, that's in our DNA. Not all of us do it or want to do it, but I love doing it, so
Is there a process that you typically follow to either identify the story or to improve it? Or are there frameworks, or I guess processes and frameworks might be the best way for me to phrase this at the moment. Are there processes or frameworks that you typically lean on?
well, this is the hard part, in some ways because, everybody's different. So sometimes it's, if it's a leader who puts one of his people on it, there's another filter. There's still a story, but it's kind of once removed from that main character if that person's gonna be putting out the communication. So I have to find my way through the filter or even around the filter, but, bring the filter. Let's find out all of this perspective, and then let's take that understanding and I guess understanding is a good way to say it. Like, I understand what you need and what you want and what everything is, and how does that align with what your leadership is trying to do. And generally, people are willing to share that. And so the framework really, and I think when you said we try to talk about we're new and different, we're not. We're old and different. It's like have a human conversation. Just talk about it. And we're always under a NDA because even if we haven't signed one, we'd be idiots to go out and say, I had a meeting with so and so company today. Um, so all of it's confidential. Just tell us what you need because our goal is to make it easier to achieve that. Um, so the framework really is let's sit down and talk about it.
Are there ways that you generally put together a story, something like the hero's journey, or, in advertising or sales or whatever you have AIDA, or talking about what's in it for me or something else of that nature? Are you either a fan of certain messaging models or frameworks, or is there something you've, patched together yourself?
There's always going to be overlap with the systems that people have come up with because we're human beings and it's the same kind of pathway we're trying to get to. I just look at those systems as a shortcut or a mnemonic to remember what I need to get to. And I don't, I find I can find all that out just having a human conversation. And if I don't structure it first, then there's, to me, a possibility of more discovery. So I don't want to get into answer these questions 3, you know, I want to get into just like you started out, like, where do you find yourself today? It could be about anything. Let's just start having a conversation. We know why we're here. We're intelligent people. Let's just explore it from dead on and then start swinging the camera around and looking at it from different perspectives. So I don't, and again, that makes it hard to market. Um, but I just haven't had success with those systems. And in some ways, we're kind of like my wife and business partner and bosses coaching business. When people would say, well, what is the system? And the system is that she works with you to help you be better. Um, and people would say to us afterwards, well, you're not. I took a thing from so and so, and it was based on traversing an arc back and forth on the stage, and all these things that had nothing to do with, you know, I worked with a guy who made $10,000 a day coaching executives all around the world, and it was horrible to watch because he was working with somebody who spoke English as a second language and basically trying to make him act like an American. It was some years ago, so it wouldn't happen, hopefully wouldn't happen today, but, um, afterwards, he decided that the guy couldn't do the keynote. It was a major, giant Las Vegas keynote. Couldn't do it, and my portion of the show, I wrote a play that he was in, that was in the middle of his keynote, where we had, a family, they were actors, one guy was a celebrity, came in, and I wrote and directed the play, and he came out after his little keynote rehearsal and said, "He won't be able to do the play. He can't he there's no way he can pull this off." And the guy came to me, the major global CEO, and he goes, "Ken, I don't understand what he's saying to me." And I said, "Just be yourself. You clearly have a really big track record of success. Just be you. I wrote it for you after having 2 or 3 conversations. Just be you." And I think a lot of times that's what people need is permission to just be themselves. But if you go in saying, "Here's our system, you have permission to be yourself," we kinda sound silly.
What has been the trajectory or the path of your career? Because, you didn't start out with this business. So, uh, were you doing that voiceover work and were you acting or whatever else or some portion of your career before beginning this work?
Always writing for other people and for myself.
And when you say writing, you know, emails, writing.
Writing for projects, like, I had one client I wrote a lot of radio for, somebody I wrote a lot of TV for. I did, write a book, songs for me, songs for clients, played in bands, um, wrote jingles, just about everything, poetry, um, 2 short films, one went to Sundance, written in iambic pentameter, like Shakespeare did, and, about a year of Hollywood craziness and wrote screenplays. So I've written just about everything imaginable, and earlier, when I was younger, I was doing a lot of voiceover work and a lot of acting for, TV commercials and for corporate videos. So I was telling stories someone else wrote and helping to make them more believable and better, and, collaborating with the directors and that kind of thing. So I feel like it's almost the same thing, but, um, that I'm doing now, except I'm the one writing them, and it pays off because I wrote some videos for a couple of bigger companies a few years ago, and then I'd read them the script, and I'm gonna read it to you because you're not gonna experience it on a page. So close your eyes, I'll describe what the visuals are, and I'll read it to you, and then I'd read it, and then they go, "Well, I really like your voice. Can you voice it too?" And I go, sure," I'd change the offer to go, "I'll write it and produce it and voice it for you so that, um, it's all packaged as one price instead of saying, 'Yes, that'll cost you extra.'" Um, but it was all it all kind of felt the same to me. I realized a few years ago, oh, I've been telling stories in whatever form, 30 seconds to however long. Of course, I did plays too. Um, and so I know what it feels like to tell them, but I also know what it feels like that's once I started directing, I know what it felt like to do it so I could help direct it and learn about all the pieces so I could help oversee. I was a creative director for a few years for big events because I could do all the jobs. And I thought, well, I've never done all the jobs at once. Um, I'll do that. So, but yeah, it really informed what we how Message Glue came about. It was after a near-death extravaganza is what I call it, and my wife and I just said, let's just take a look at what we've been doing and what we wanna do and create a company where we get to spend as much time together as possible and do what we really love and find people that we really love to work with. And that's really what drove 15 years ago starting Message Glue.
Well, now you said near death extravaganza, so it sounds like the specifics might be different from some entrepreneurs, but it sounds like in the broad strokes that you had a similar motivation to a lot of entrepreneurs. For me, for example, I just don't want a boss. And, you know, but there's also an aspect of it that can I do what I really want to do? And we could even bracket that and say, well, is this what you want to do in the moment? Or is it what you want to do as in accomplish in the long run or whatever else? But I'm just going to simply say, can I do what I want to do and still take care of my family? You know? And so it sounds to me like you had, again, broad strokes, similar motivations to a lot of entrepreneurs. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess I had that "I don't want a boss" thing a long time ago, although it was more like I don't want one boss, like, I want a whole bunch of project bosses. Um, I want the variety, the variety pack of bosses. And I'd been on my own for a long time. Started a publishing company first for music, and so I'd kind of been used to that. It'd been so long since I worked for anybody that, I'd always been subcontracting and been pretty successful at it, and then it was really us saying, "Let's try to find something that feeds this weird niche talent we have, um, talents that we have together, that allow us to work together and make a living doing this." And so I guess in some ways, yeah, it's similar, and it also was a little more urgent because, it took me about 8 months to recover from it was just the H1N1 pandemic that killed 2% of the people, and I was apparently sitting on that fence that separated the 2%, from the other people, and I almost fell backwards over into the 2% side, so, barely survived it, and, took a long time to get back to normal, and then during that time, just having these conversations and going, "Okay, well, how do we see how can we have, our life, take care of our kid and be, um, and do something fun and do something meaningful," kind of became the main thing. Like, I want relationships with people that are meaningful and that we enjoy, and we've been pretty successful at finding those people over the last 15 years, which is really nice. And some of them are really close friends now. Clients started out as clients and, which is really nice. So I wish you well with that. Anytime you wanna throw some ideas around, I'm happy to help. I love helping other people, as I did a few weeks ago. I was saying with this young woman who's starting her own agency, just thinking through all of the stuff that I've been through and fallen on my face in because I didn't plan it very well. I just kinda dived into the pool and went, "Let's exploit my talents. I'm funny. I'll do stand-up comedy. I can play guitar. I'll sing in clubs. I can write. I'll get some clients. I'll be in a band. I'll write some songs. Um, and let's see how it goes." I didn't have a real structured and didn't have a family at the time, so that probably helped.
How long ago was this that, H1N1 and then founding your business?
15 years. It was right on the basically, yeah, just as Message Glue, was born from the ashes. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And it does change. I wrote a little book that about friends said, "You write, you have to do something with this." And I went, I just want to get better. But I did end up finally just kind of writing a fable. Because it's ultimately you end up in a carpe diem kind of place if you come out of it with any kind of a positive attitude. And so I did write about my book's called Blip. It's basically about how very, very, very short our lives are when you compare them to the life of the earth, because the earth will, it's got a 6 billion year lifespan and we're at about 4.5 billion. So, so basically the earth is 75 years old if you think about it. Um, but taking that number and the percentage of time of that we live is a really funny number. It's like 0.0000000, 213% of the life of the earth. And that amused me at the time. And so I was trying to do something with it, and it ended up being a fable. The first half is about the short history of the world and the way we behaved through it. And then the second half is a random kid being born who does the math and goes, huh, that's not a very long time. So it's a fun little tiny, and it only takes 20 minutes to read because, as I like to say, if you're going to write a book about how short life is, it shouldn't eat up a bunch of your life to read it. That would be disingenuous.
Has there been an evolution of your business then in this time? Because it
Oh, yeah.
sounds to me like while there is there's an essence to your work, or there's a through line, the through line feels much too clear or specific. There is an idea of what you are, what your work is, who you are, all of that, it feels to me has been there throughout your career or your life potentially. But I'm guessing in trying to find, you know, what people are willing to pay for, basically, that there must have been a journey that your business has gone on.
Yeah, we tried to fit into normal, that's a creative director role or writer role or speaker coach role, or and so that's definitely evolved. We're really in a place because we also now, my wife's side of the business is a lot of content producing for events, organizing, not only helping people with content and shaping it, but organizing everybody too, and kind of stage managing all of the players so that everything gets done on time at the same time. Um, but I think if you look back on how those, we're still in some ways it's just exploiting the talents that we have. And in another way, we're just back to our regular old value proposition of we make it better. We make the communication better. We make the experience better. We make the process better or more comfortable. Maybe better is not the right word. Maybe that's too arrogant, but we make the communication more effective. We help make the experience more comfortable and more enjoyable. Um, and those are the people that we keep coming back to working with over and over again because they're like, oh, they'll be fun. Because there's an element in the communication business, especially the event side of a little bit of theater. A lot of people that worked in theater move over because there's more money to be made in events. And so there's a sense of, I want it to also be fun. And after near death experiences, like I want it to be meaningful and I want it to be fun. I want it to matter because, you know, I don't have a ton of time for things that don't matter.
In all of the work that you do, given that you've been doing this, you were doing it, or at least in the form of message glue, you were doing it well before COVID, pandemic times. Have you noticed any difference in the way that people pay attention or listen to or otherwise receive the messages or communications that you work on?
Well, I mean, what's different? What was big different at the time was virtual events. And now afterwards, uh, yearning to get back to live, but also understanding that a virtual aspect of it is also important, especially for companies that have people spread all over the world. So there's been an evolution in how things get delivered, and we have tons of ideas that when it first started, we thought, "Oh, this medium, there's so much you can do with it," and talked about it, and, at the time, the clients we were working with weren't really ready. It was just like, "I hate being on camera," you know, um, and it wasn't, "I wanna be on stage, I wanna do it the way I've always done it, I don't like this," and now it's evolved a little more to be accepted and looked at more like, you know, television production really, and we always tell people, your people, you know, this is my laptop that I'm shaking on right now. We consume so much rich media on our laptops, whether it's YouTube or television or movies or whatever, that is compelling and really great storytelling and, some cases, really great acting, but compelling stuff that draws us in. And when you slap somebody, you know, up on a screen and they're a tiny square talking and there's a giant slide with 15 bullets on it, you know, who wants to watch it? It doesn't matter what's being said or how important it is. We've been conditioned. I used to always say to, you know, to clients too, we have this in our hand all the time. It's full of rich media experiences. We have to give our people a sense that we get that. We get what they look at all the time. And that's a budget thing sometimes, but also a sensibility thing because the tools tend to be PowerPoint and, you know, I think on my screen talking to you, I'm this big, but you're a little bigger as we talk through these things. And I've been on and helped with content on Zoom events where, you know, the slide is the whole screen and there's a tiny square and you can't really see the person. And it's the human that matters, you know. And if you're going to have that slide there, then let's have movement. Let's have you know, let's progress the story in the image that's sitting there and taking our attention or trying to take our attention. So, the short answer is that was obviously the long answer. The short answer is yes, it's evolved, but I think it has a long way to go because there's so much potential.
You're reminding me of, I think it was Marshall McLuhan who said that first we define our systems or tools or whatever, and then they define us. Does that sound familiar?
That
And
does
it
sound
sort of
familiar,
sounds
yeah.
to me like you are at least touching on that, you know, the large slide might be easy, common, whatever, however I might want to describe it, but that there are times when that's not really appropriate for whatever your goals happen to be, client. Is that
Mhm.
right?
And it started as basically, you know, back in the day, you know, there was note cards that people would stand on stage with and read their speech and flip their note cards, you know, as they talk through it. And companies then had PowerPoint. And I remember one company, it was a pretty big deal because they'd reached this uh, quite a large revenue milestone. And the speaker was out there for about 20 minutes. And the slide had lots of colors and things on it, but it had basically everything he was talking about. And he talked through it one section by section, da, 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 da. And at the bottom, you know, revealed the number that had been there for the last 20 minutes. And no one applauded. And afterwards, he was really angry. He goes, "What the hell?" And I go, "We need to talk about a reveal. We need to talk about theatrical devices that you are not using that could really make it more fun. You know, timing, rhythm, reveal, all the things that make shtick funny and make, communication meaningful and have been around. humans have been using them since we could draw on cave walls. Cover it with an animal skin and go, "Oh, I found a river," and everybody goes, "Oh, great." Um, all of that has been around forever, and then we don't, for some reason, use it to our advantage, and I'm not great at understanding that when I'm sitting in a room with people, like, "You know what you could do?" And, uh, and I get a lot of eyes rolling like, "Well, that's gonna require that we rehearse. Our CEO doesn't have time," you know, and you go, "Well, okay, we try to make it better. We know how to make it better, and we will say it and hope, and sometimes it works."
How much do you find that just good communication, whatever the medium is or whatever the goal is, that people not executing or delivering upon that is due to them just not doing the things that they already know versus not being aware that, for me, for example, I knew that I used to say the word a lot when I was speaking extemporaneously. And I was aware of it. People had told me. It never really bothered me because I knew that when I had something prepared, I didn't use very many filler words like that. But then when I started recording, it did really start to bother me. So I was aware of it. In the moment, I didn't really notice it, but I still chose not to work on it. So then I would go to a conference or whatever else. And if I got off script, then I'm sure it came in quite a bit. And maybe that bothered my audience, maybe it didn't. But that's just an example of how much is it that people aren't aware of how they're showing up, whether it's in how they write or their speaking, their PowerPoint slide design, and they're aware of it. They're aware or they're not aware. And when they are aware, they're just choosing not to do the work.
That's certainly part of it, and I think part of it too is that there's so many pressure on the people that help the people that go on stage, and if the people that are going on stage won't rehearse, or they're too busy, or there are too many crucial things they need to deal with, then these people have to protect them so that their time isn't impinged upon, and so then you don't get a lot of growth or improvement in how they that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is it doesn't matter to us if you say, or, or the things that people say. These are human things that we do when we communicate. If you're on stage or you're on camera, there's a certain amount of self-consciousness that's going to come in. And it's really at that point, we just say, just embrace who you are. If you pull yourself out of what you're trying to say, to worry about your gestures or your ums or your you knows or your and stuffs, now you're not thinking about what you're trying to say. So, that's what my wife teaches always, that, just if you are thoughtful about what you are communicating, then we will believe that and we will listen to you. And it's really that simple. That's the great actors are focused and thoughtful, and we wanna know, we wanna see what's in their heads and watch them do the thing they do. And when there's some self-consciousness or weirdness about it, or I'm afraid to take a drink of water because I was told to only take a drink of water after 10 minutes, we were completely pulled out of being a person who's trying to communicate. And that's one of the downsides of having rules for things that humans do, because what works for this guy does not work for this person. And so I wouldn't worry about your ums is basically the gist of that.
Well, I think at the same time, though, some people will say that you haven't really learned to speak a language until you've learned the equivalent of So, in English, you're thinking, you say or whatever when you have to you're speaking, and then you have to think for a second. And So I got my master's in German, lived in Germany. My German was very good, except that I never worked on my American accent. But even thinking about that, while my German was very good, sure, I made plenty of mistakes. I never really got to the point where I could do the equivalent of that. I always thought about what I was saying. Now, I was fluent, it was natural to me, but there was a split second where my sentence was put together before I spoke. And but it was so fast that to me it felt completely natural, just like speaking English. And when I remember one time that someone was telling me, well, just to speak more fluently, really for you, Eric, you need to work on your accent, but you also just need to speak faster. And it was really hard. This has come up in several conversations recently, so it's on my mind. It was really hard to explain to this person that's how I speak in English. I take a split second to think about what I'm going to say. And as a result, there it might feel to you like there's a lack of flow or I'm not spontaneous or whatever it is. But for me, that also gives me a better shot of, you know, saying what I want to say. And and so part of how I'm thinking about that for us, let's go with a presentation of some sort, though, as we've talked about, you work in other media. If somebody really wants to become a keynote speaker, then there are probably certain things that, this or that is getting in the way of you effectively telling your story or convincing people or whatever. And I'm not saying that universally you cannot use filler words or pause or whatever. I really don't think that a there is a model that everyone can follow to become a paid keynote speaker. But at the same time, you certainly look at people and say, we could make that better. And if make part of making it better was your CEO client has not figured out how to naturally use or and instead, while accomplishing their goal, then they kind of I realize it's not exactly binary, but sort of they have this binary choice of, well, just keep doing what you're doing and it could be better, but it's not, or work at it. And then all of those things that might otherwise be distractions from effectively communicating this message or whatever it is, those will feel so natural to the audience that it's no longer a distraction. It's part of that communication.
As we say in improv, yes, and, uh, I'd swing the camera back around inside, looking out from your eyes and not worry about any of that because you're thoughtful, so you're communicating well. You paused. I made myself listen to whether you paused while you were just laying that out to me just now. And yeah, you did a couple times, but it wasn't distracting because I was listening to what you had to say and I was interested in what you had to say. And I would say to, a person who thinks you need to speak faster or slower or less ums or, to say to that person, you need to listen to this human being communicate to you instead of trying to make them a different person in your mind. Because now you're not listening. Said 42 times. Yeah, what was my speech about? I don't know. You're excuse me. And we see that a lot with, worked for a lot of global companies and when you're in the trenches with somebody like especially, um, introverted speakers from other countries who've been told how they need to be loud or they need more energy or all of these, and where those comments are usually coming from. One of the ones we worked with, this guy was unbelievably brilliant, and he was from a country where his boss is from the Midwest, and he was an ex-jock, and he needed him to be in better shape. He needed him to be more aggressive. He needed him to stand up and to challenge people. And he needed to, he kept saying he basically needed him to be a different person. And he goes, he's really smart. He knows his stuff. And we worked with him for about a month, and he was so happy. I remember when told him, just be yourself. Ignore his perspective that you can never meet because you're not an ex-football jock from the Midwest. Just be you and be comfortable being you. Big change in that guy, I noticed, and it's incumbent upon, I always want to just go right to the manager and say, listen to that person. Because yes, their rhythms are different. Yes, their accent might be a little thicker than you want it to be, and it might be hard for you to understand them. So listen harder. And, there's a reason that person is with your company. Listen to them a little more, with a little more effort and with a wider perspective, and get a sense of where they're coming from, and the meaning will be clear. I used to joke about have you ever heard that thing where if you're some constellations, they say if you look at them, you can't see them. Like Cassiopeia is one of those that you kind of know where it is, but then you look to the side a little bit. And the guy that did tech work on computers that I worked with, and I'm not sure where he was from, super heavy accent. And I thought, oh man, I'm not gonna be able to understand him. And then one day I thought, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's like that star thing. If I just listen off to the side, like I don't try to hear individual words, I just take it in slightly skewed off to the left or the right. And then everything was clear. And I thought, oh, and so I have a sensibility or a sensitiveness to that, because I just want to say, I know people are under pressure. I know that they have stuff from their boss, but in a moment with another human being, you got to remember that person isn't me. I need to take a moment and let them be them. And it makes for more meaningful, I think, communication, one to one and in meetings, and certainly on stage. And
Well, yeah, that was exactly what I was thinking, is that as soon as you get in front of people, I think this came up in a Seinfeld episode and some of his stand-up, but it's, based on studies or whatever that, but the way that Seinfeld put it in one of the episodes of his show is that
I saw a thing, actually, a study that said speaking in front of a crowd is considered the number one fear of the average person. I found that amazing. Number two was death. Death was number two? This means to the average person, if you have to be at a funeral, you would rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy.
And so it doesn't really matter for a lot of people if you're speaking in front of 4 other people, or if it's 4,000 other people, that, yes, I do think that there are lots of things that I suspect you would look for in, well, what are you really trying to accomplish? And does that need to be a 60-minute talk or a 5-minute talk, or who knows what? Does it need slides or does it not need slides? How's the lighting? I don't know what. But maybe one of the big things is the person thinking about the fact that they're giving a talk and they're on stage, and that's what they're thinking about, and they're not thinking about, that they know their stuff. This guy who's really brilliant, does he know his stuff? Or if you're, a struggle on a podcast is not performing for the audience, but rather having a conversation. And can you, I would say, and I would love for you to tell me if you think differently. One way that I would put it is, can you, stop trying to perform and just talk about the thing, or just be who you are? And then if you can do that, the cadence of your speech, the PowerPoint slides, the lighting, whatever else, that will mostly come after?
Yeah, I wouldn't say stop trying to perform because that is a tough command to follow. I would say just be thoughtful about what you're saying, just like you are anytime. And working with some executives, this is one of my favorite case studies ever because I did an experiment and it was kind of for me a little bit, but also I knew it made the speaker really comfortable. But the same thing, he needed more energy. He needed to really rile these people up, and his boss wrote his speech in all caps, and he was supposed to read it. And I'm not a designer, so I can remember serif, sans serif. I think it was block letters. So in bold type, capitalized, it's like a magic picture book where you start seeing shapes. It's hard to discern individual words. And he goes, "Well, there's a speech I have to give." And I said, "Okay, well, let's hear it." And he goes, "Da, da, da," and he started to do it. And he was so introverted and so low key. And I said, "What's our goal?" And he said, "The goal is for everybody to get excited about this new offer." I said, "Okay." And so we didn't change any of the words because his boss wouldn't let him. So I said, "Can you change your intro just a little bit, do you think?" And he goes, "Yeah, let's do it." I just don't tell him. So he said, "Hi, everybody. I'm here to tell you about a really super exciting addition that we have to our portfolio. And for those of you who know me already, you know that this is me, very excited. And for those of you who don't know me, this is me, very excited." Huge laugh. And everything after that was all information about the thing. And he was so happy because it let him be himself with a little bit of comedy writing in it. But, those are the other things we have in our quiver is the theatrical devices that have worked forever. Um, so you can pull those out and insert them where they don't impinge upon the who that person is. Somebody else giving that speech wouldn't worked, but he had to, and that's who he was. And so and he was thoughtful about all of it, and that was his version of thoughtful. And just by being able to be his version of himself, boom, success. And so I kind of, you know, bristle a little bit about, a keynote speaker has to learn this, 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 and this. There are going to be tons of people in somebody's ear over time at presentations, and my advice is don't don't listen to them. Just be you. Be thoughtful and be you, and you're going to be fine. And one guy would always go like this on stage. I just I just love everybody in here. And it, and the audio guys, "Hey, don't hate your laugh." And and he goes, "Oh, sorry." And he goes, "You can't put your hands up there." And he turned and looked at me and I said, "Don't listen to that. Dude, hit your mic. That's how you express this enthusiasm. So what? Boom, boom. Drop your mic on the stage. I don't, that's a $100, $200 microphone. You know, everyone's, you're going to feel it in the room, but some guy yelling at you now he's self conscious about every gesture that he's going to make, and I just think, oh, you be quiet, run sound, run sound because you're great at it. Make sure everything he says is clear and, just have your hand on the fader if he starts gesturing wildly so you can lower the impact. But let's work with who he is. He's not on stage all the time. And yeah, so these are the things over time where you just get, I don't miss being in the room because some things that I just write for and I don't go do, or I'm working with clients on individual writing things. And I don't always miss being in the room because there's a theatrical spidey sense. I talk about this with my wife where because of our training, you can feel something's wrong in the room. And I don't always know exactly what it is right away, but you just walk in and go, "Mm-mm." And so I don't I don't always miss that. If I'm not on something, I'm like, "Oh, good, I don't have to get an ulcer on that one."
I'm really curious. Hmm, I don't know. Well, I don't know if this ties in exactly, but I'm really curious about not just one way transmission of information, but also, I forget if you said your wife does more of this or if you do more of it, but you know, how much you get involved in helping people, teaching people to listen rather than to just wait for an opportunity to speak. And for the sake of completeness, I guess, I will say I imagine that this can show up not just in a one-on-one conversation or presenting on stage and dealing with Q&A, but probably also you mentioned, Slack messages or whatever it was. There's probably also an aspect of this that some of the feedback that an individual or a company might get might be asynchronous, but there must, seems to me, still be an aspect of your work or your wife's work or both where in order to make that communication better, you have to work with them on listening and not just waiting for that chance to speak.
And it's yeah, it's I mean, everybody has a connection to it. There are certain things, like, that come from training, but we all have human relationships. We all know how to listen. Um, and if we start at knowing that, then and we do cross over into this sometimes, it's mostly when there's a panel, thing, or if there's a presenter who introduces another one and they have a little bit of banter and then the one leaves. Um, and it's uncomfortable because they don't really know how to be in that space and not be doing something without the training that we've had. We're perfectly comfortable being quiet on stage. In fact, it's a huge part of acting to be still and to be listened. But if you're self-conscious at all, then it's weird to be standing on stage while someone else talks. And there's so many aspects to what makes a panel work, but that's a big one, is to say, stage wise and, theatrically speaking, if I turn and look at the person speaking, then if the audience looks at me, I throw their focus to the person who's talking. And in theater is called throwing focus. And then I look at the monitor or the moderator when they are talking or whatever it is. And then if everybody does that, then the audience knows who to look at. So that's a big thing there. And whether or not you're going, okay, I need to be ready to talk about semiconductors as soon as Joanne is done saying what she's saying, I'm still throwing focus to her, even though I might have a little bit of mental turmoil until the moderator goes, Ken, tell us about the semiconductors. And then, oh, this is the part I know and I can be thoughtful about. And I know everybody's throwing focus at me. But if you don't have any of that training, some people feel like, "Oh, I'm uncomfortable sitting like this," and and then they do something different, like mess with their shoe and that it steals focus. And so you can have that conversation to say, "Here are ways to help each other be more successful by just helping the audience know where to look, whether you're listening to them or not." But it'd be great if you were, because it's always more effective to say, before I say something about semiconductors, Joanne, the idea that we're gonna be able to make all of them in Pennsylvania as a result of what you've been doing is just huge. And then the audience is like, "Oh, these people have some sort of chemistry." So there's lots of ways that we interpret what's happening on stage, beyond just knowing how to listen, and then you get into with panels where there was for a while, I thought we'd have to always say, if you can give a one-word answer, then that'd be cool. Because it's like, whoa, you've asked me my question now, and I get to pontificate. And I remember a CEO one time, somebody goes, "Do we, because of the thing, and we're doing, blah, 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 are we going to do blah, 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 blah?" And he goes, "No." Huge laugh, huge physical reset of the room where the energy is different in there now because everybody reacted to something at the exact same moment, which is another theatrical piece of basically a reveal, but it came on a joke. Like the money before that I talked about, if he'd revealed that and everyone saw it at the same time, they would have applauded because if we experience it all at once and it's something we're happy about, that's what drives standing ovations. You know, there are ways that we can manipulate for the good of all using, theatrical devices to our advantage. So, and so panels, I mean, there's always something you can do to help an audience and to help the people on stage stay connected, even if you know that that COO who has to talk next is not thinking about what's happening on. At least he's throwing focus.
Coming into this conversation, my idea of your work was that you not exclusively, but predominantly do things like write talks and or produce some aspects of events. I recall in a prior conversation you talking about developing a presentation as in the, the visuals, the PowerPoint or whatever it was. And I might have thought other things I don't recall, but early in now this conversation, you expanded my understanding of that a bit. And so some of what I'm wondering now is if somebody, who would call you? What kind of situation would someone be in? What's their job to be done that somebody could listen to you and me and say, maybe I could use that.
It's usually off something known. It's usually off one of the things you named, or that somebody goes, "Oh, I need a writer," or, um, one of the things that a client said a few years ago was like, "I really like that you not only are helping us communicate, but you seem to really understand our business." And I got a call from somebody a while ago on a project who said, "Well, they need somebody who can write, but they also really need somebody who understands their business." And I had done a project for him before, so I was like, "Oh, I understand their business." Like, "Oh, great." Then so it usually comes through something known unless it's a referral where, "We hired him for this, and then they did this and this and this and this and this," and then, "Oh, great." We can use all that's in that bag, but comes back to that, yeah, the who would call you, the way that you phrase it, which was wonderful, which is basically it. Why would I call you? Um, and changes with every referral. I had a client I talked to just a couple of days ago who just said, "I need this." Um, and I know I can. I put a post on LinkedIn last week or so about these 3 cool varied projects that I did this year. One of them was the 67-second video and then some songs I wrote, for Microsoft, and then, I helped a client with his book, getting his book ready for publication and really editing chapter by chapter, and so I just posted, "This is a really fun, varied kind of year," and the guy who's I helped with the book just immediately posted, "I use you for everything." It's like, whenever I need to bounce an idea off, I call you. And, those are probably certainly the most fun because then the person on the other end is open to, "Well, what do we wanna do with it?" "Well, I have to give this keynote, but," and sometimes it's like, somebody's gonna write it for me, and if I can I give it to you to look at it and just make sure it sounds like me? You know? So it's really, yeah, I mean, once a relationship is made, then it's easy to know that they can really, come to us with anything. And then hopefully if somebody's referring us, they can say the same thing, you know, just ask them.
Do you have some sort of industry or vertical specialization or places where you excel? Or have you been able to, succeed or make it work without being too focused in one area or another?
I'll answer it this way. My job is to get that knowledge out of the head of the person who needs, or the group that needs to communicate it, or the company, into the heads of their audience and the hearts of their audience in a way that makes them feel compelled to do business or partner or whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. The specifics of what they do is known to them, and I'll learn it through the process, but I don't necessarily need to know it ahead of time, because that's, again, I'll yank my camera back to the very, very edge of the theater. It's a human group of human beings who are trying to accomplish something. And that story is that's what we do. That's what our great stories are made of. So, and it's not a murder mystery. In this case, it's a healthcare vertical that needs, to expand into a new market or whatever it is. It's still at its very basic. They just humans who are trying to make something happen. And there's a cast. You mentioned Seinfeld, and that cast. People talk about the magic of that ensemble, and then other shows where you go, I thought it would go, but it never did. It didn't make it. And, um, sometimes the cast isn't right. The idea is great, but the cast isn't right. And um, I asked one client who was a larger company, and their CEO was leaving, and they knew who was going to take his place. And she said, "What do you think? What do you think it's going to be like?" And I said, "Well, it changes the chemistry of the cast. So it's going to be really interesting, because you're still essentially trying to do the same thing, but now you have a different cast. So when these kinds of things that we're working on, we have to take that into account and find that how to convey that new chemistry." So, I look at it as it's a human endeavor, basically, is what it comes down to. So, how do we shape that so that it's a human endeavor that also means something to the people who are watching it, or being told it, or reading about it, or whatever?
Two questions. The first one being, is there somewhere that I should go, whether it's your website or LinkedIn? We're connected on LinkedIn, thankfully. And so that I can continue to better my understanding of you and your work. And then the second question, are there things that we didn't touch on that we should, words of wisdom, or things that you would recommend that I be thinking about?
I'd love to have a longer conversation with you about what you're trying to do, just in case any of my experience as a odd entrepreneur would be would be helpful. Um, I just get a lot of joy out of that, of helping other people to think it through, and some of the details that I didn't discover till much later, like, you know, struggling with the bookkeeping aspect of the business, and then finally turning it over to someone, and the next year revenue doubled, you know, things like, an entrepreneurial coach that I worked with who just said, "Work in your unique zone of talent, hire everybody for all the other stuff." These are didn't advice that didn't come from me, but came from other people that helped me think about it differently. She also said to me, "Your brand is, um, I make it better." And, I said, "Yeah, again, it makes it hard to market us because it just sounds arrogant. That's what we want, and that's what we do, and that's what we can do, but it's hard to go into somebody and going, 'Where you are? Oh, yeah, I can make it better.'" Um, so that's odd, but it was helpful to think about it that way. So anything that she shared, and there's another entrepreneurial coach too. So when we have a longer conversation about that, I'm happy to share all that stuff with you. Um, as far as contacting us, I would suggest there's a video on my LinkedIn page about storytelling. It's, I don't know, 2 or 3, 4, maybe 4 minutes long, but it's pretty. I voiced it. Save money on the voiceover talent. Excuse me. But it's very simple, just line animation that lays out how we think about storytelling. And then, of course, messageglue.com is where there's a focus on storytelling there, mostly from the aspect of writing and coaching or facilitating. And so there's a part of the page that's dedicated to Anna and part that's dedicated to me. And people have given us great feedback on it. I don't know how much, if we get any traction from it, but that's there to look at. And over the last couple of years, I've posted a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. So all of it written by me and not by AI. So in fact, I did post something maybe a year and a half or so ago, maybe longer, where I had an AI generated picture of myself and said, I realize now after all these years, that's what I am. I'm an AI. Clients prompt me and then I give them what they ask for. Usually now after using some AI tools, I think faster than the sometimes without those crazy illogical, please take 3 of the fingers off that 8-fingered guy that you just drew. So yeah, those 2 places are probably the best. A little more personality and some testimonials on the LinkedIn site, but a decent overview on messageglue.com. And the email's easy, ken@messageglue.com. So that's another easy way to reach out.
Well, I appreciate you being here, and considering that we have a few minutes after I stop the recording, I may pick your brain briefly on podcasting and all that, but I appreciate you being here. Thank you for recording with me, Ken. This has been awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric.